Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Now today we're covering, such a heavy subject. We're going to be covering Saturn transiting through the sign of Aries. And thank you very much to a lady that we're calling Aries Rising, who's submitted her chart to help with this podcast to make it more real. So thank you very much to her. First name is Julie, so we're quite happy to call her Julie, but no more details than that. And she's sharing her chart. So what we're covering is Saturn, and it's going to transit through the sign of Aries. How's that going to manifest itself? What do you need to be looking for in your chart? What do you need to be aware of when you have a Saturn in Aries transit? Now, there'll be more than two types of people that I'll be talking to, but there are numbers of people that it's going to be more relevant for. So obviously, and I say obviously, I'll explain why in a minute, if your sun sign is Aries, Saturn is going to transit through your sun sign. Now, when Saturn goes through our own sign, it isn't an easy time. So I'll just quickly tell you that when Saturn was going through my sign of the zodiac and it got towards my sun sign, which was last year, I lost a doggy, so our doggy died. My motorbike ceased to work. Not those two things are the same thing at all. Next door neighbour died, and we were involved with that. And since Saturn is about endings rather than beginnings, there were a lot of that, and coupled with the doggy dying, my husband and I fell out spectacularly. We've never fallen out about anything, and it resulted in us going to counselling for 6 weeks, which I requested. And in my case, the reason that Saturn affected, inverted commas, affected my relationship is because my sun sign is located natally in my 7th house. So we have to keep in mind that we're not just talking about the sign of the zodiac, for yourself, if you're listening, we're not just talking about the fact that it's going past your sun sign. Which house is it going through? So how is that going to manifest? And the spooky thing, is that the right word? Exactly 30 years, I think it's about 30 years, but let's say the transit of Saturn, the last time Saturn transited past my sun sign through my 7th house, my ex-husband ran off with another woman. So there was a discontentment and an ending of a relationship. So in our counselling session, which was very good, we managed to resolve the relationship, which was precipitated, I have to point out, by the fact that the dog had died. And anybody that's been listening and knows me well, we do have another dog now. Not that she's replacing the previous dog, but we have another doggy. So, inverted commas, everything ended well. Is that the right thing? But Saturn is a heavy-duty planet that we cannot ignore. It's got a much more different energy to Jupiter. So Jupiter transiting past the sun sign can make us want to go on travel or overdo things or eat too much cake. But when Saturn makes a transit, when it makes an exact transit, so in my case, because I'm I'm in a middle degree, so I'm 15 degrees Pisces, but I've got Mercury at a very late degree. It is 24 degrees Pisces. I've had, and don't forget, Saturn retrogrades at various different points. So, and because my Mercury is in my 7th house, I've had a sort of, it lasted, the Saturnness lasted far longer than it might have been if I'd had my Mercury at an early degree, which I don't. So that's just my personal experience, how Saturn, inverted commas, affected me. And so just to demonstrate to you that it's the house that it goes through and the fact that it goes past your sun sign. Yeah, doesn't really make much difference. And the other thing I need to point out is that when Saturn does transit through a sign, as an astrologer, I will see in my private practice those signs of the zodiac that it's transiting through. So I have been in practice for near enough 30 years. I wasn't in full practice when this last happened. I was still training to be a homeopath. So when it happened last time, Saturn transiting through Aries, that is, because the last time I went through Aries, it started on the 8th of April 1996. So I'm just talking about myself now. So myself, I was just beginning to change direction out of retailing into the weird and mystical world that we're in now, and started training to be a homeopath, doing readings on the side, etc. I hadn't set up in full private practice. I was aiming in that way. When it got into Aries, it didn't do that for me. When it was in my sun sign, there was too much loss. My ex-husband ran off with another woman and I had to relocate, right? So I don't have on my client records, clients that I'm seeing that I could say to you, because I was looking to see if I got examples. I haven't got examples of the last time that Saturn transited through the sign of Aries. I had a different email address. I've still got the client records, but I don't keep them date, order, okay, so I can't tell you. But I can tell you that all the other signs of the zodiac, so from Taurus onwards, I can give examples, if we're going to, of clients that have come because Saturn's transiting through their sign, and this is what was going on for them. So they're depending on the house, there can be that there'll be endings of some sort. Okay, so that's that. So let me quote, and I'm going to be quoting from a number of textbooks today, because you don't just take my word for it about how things are. We're going to just cover a little bit of what Margaret E. Hone says in her Modern Textbook of Astrology, Revised Edition, which certainly ain't modern now because it's a flippin' antique. It's a marvellous book. And so that we can get a flavour of what Saturn is all about, and also what Aries is all about, because we're going to have Saturn going into Aries. So Saturn, she says, her keywords are limitation and cold. The urge towards limitation may be expressed by the desire to keep within bounds, to be cautious, and to work to achieve security. When considering a personal chart, the judgment of a person's power of control will largely depend on his Saturnian characteristics. However, the placing of limitations also implies the narrowness of the bound so drawn, so the ability of the person to feel insufficiency in life will also be shown. Also, his tendency to become chilled, either emotionally or physically by illness, will be indicated. Saturn traits are very much those of the sign Capricorn, which it rules. Now, I natally have my Saturn in Capricorn, and I don't have a problem with Saturn because it's in its happy home. They are also expressed also in the activities of the 10th house, which is the natural house of this planet in sign. They're also expressed in the sign Aquarius and in the sphere of the 11th house matter, since Saturn was the traditional ruler of these until the discovery of Uranus under the rulership or part rulership of which they are now considered to be. Authorities differ, especially on the continent. A key to understanding of the ability to endure difficulties patiently, but nevertheless to feel them keenly, the urge to rise by overcoming such difficulties, and the ability to bear the weight of responsibility entailed will be given by the placing of Saturn in sign and house and by its strength in the chart. Now that's considering if you're looking at somebody's natal Saturn placement. What we're looking at today is that Saturn is going to transit through the sign, but I just wanted to introduce for you the idea of what Saturn is all about: limitation and cold, and becoming chilled either emotionally or physically by illness will be indicated. So it could be that Saturn will transit through a part of your chart like your 6th house, and that if you have a planet in there in the sign of Aries, there could be some health condition or illness associated with that. Now, I'm not the old-fashioned person that says Saturn indicates that you're going to pop at any moment. Back in the day, people didn't live very long anyway, and I don't think Jesus did either. He's only got to about 30-something. So we now we human beings now not only experience our first Saturn return, which is between the ages of 28 and 30, depending on what sign your Saturn is in, which house it's in, what year it is. And we will live through our second Saturn return, which is in our 60s, and we might, if we're lucky, even make a third Saturn return when we're in our 90s plus, depending on our inherited health traits and where the heck we're living, and we're not in a war zone type of thing. So back in the day when astrology was invented, and thinking of Jesus now, he didn't die naturally, mind, but people didn't live as long as they do now. So I don't go along the thing that Saturn comes past and immediately pop it, okay? So that's not where I'm coming from. Those aren't going to be keywords that I'm using, but it's limitations. Now, my next quote is from The Only Way to Learn Astrology, Volume 1, Basic Principles by Marion March and Joe McEvers, and I'm quoting page 217, where she's talking about Saturn in the signs. Don't forget, this is natally now. She says, they say, because there's two of them, Saturn represents the learning principle. A lesson learned through Saturn is a lesson you will never forget. Trust me on that one. It is one I won't forget. And in my case, the irony of Saturn transiting through, and I wasn't that aware of astrology at that point. Okay, so I'm 30s, in my 30s at that point. So my ex-husband is having an affair. I don't know about it. I don't discover about it. And Saturn is transiting through my 7th house where my sun sign's located and my Mercury's located. And it was a shock, and I managed to keep it together. I didn't do anything too daft. I did relocate from where I was living in London, and I came to live in Bath. Best thing I ever did, because my whole life took off at that point. However, when it happened the second time, I was acutely aware of what happened the first. And, do you know, I just thought, we're so strong, nothing's going to happen. And the death of the dog was what precipitated the wobbliness of both of us and our emotional state. And I tell you, we have never, and we're never likely to have it happen again, but the most horrendous row. And all I could keep in my mind, the first time this happened, I ended up a single mother. Well, my kiddie's grown up and left home, and I thought, I don't want to be single again. Being single in my circumstances, in my 60s, owning a nice property, and I don't want to be single. I don't want to be single at this age. And I went out of my way is the wrong way to describe it. I was so aware of what had happened previously, and I didn't want history to repeat itself. I wanted to learn the lesson the first time round. That as irritated as I might have been about him, I love him to bits. What I didn't like was the way he was being, because he was suffering so deeply grief, which I probably hadn't recognised because I was so suffering grief myself. But I'm glad that I knew that previously I'd gone to a company called Relate, and they do counselling and they help people where couples had split up. I'm so glad that not that I'm ever going to forget it, but the Saturn sensibilities, like, well, let's do that before we even, because we got as far as like who was going to live here and where was going to live there. That's how bad it got. But let's do the counselling first and then reassess. And in those sessions, because they give you a safe space with a third party that's not related, doesn't know you from Adam, and you can say how you feel. Trust me, we were doing that. And she held the space really well. She was Taurus, by the way, which was good. And she did ask me, what sign of the zodiac? And I said, well, you're either a Taurus or a Capricorn because you're barely moving in the seat you're sitting in. And she turned out to be a Taurus. She held the space and we managed to resolve it. And probably if I'd never had that first Saturn incident, I might have just gone for the divorce type of thing. But because I was so aware of what had happened previously and how awful divorce can be, and it wasn't as if either one of us had done anything like in the previous case where he'd run off with another woman. There was no way I was going to forgive him because it was the second time he'd done it. There was nothing inherently between us that was malfunctioning other than this deep grief, and he was suffering worse than me. So Saturn does give you a lesson, and he was, inverted commas, suffering from Uranus transit because he's a Taurus. But anyway, enough about me. Now, Marianne's going to give us, Marianne and her friend, Marianne and Joan, give us what Saturn's like when it's in the sign of Aries, because loads of books will give you Saturn in their sign, right? So this is natally in a sign, but it does tell us how Saturn reacts when it goes through that sign. So even if you're not a sun sign Aries, but you've got a bit of Aries in your chart somewhere, what will Saturn do when it goes through that house? So Saturn in Aries, and her keyword is ingenious, and in the old-fashioned astrology, which I'll probably talk about, I don't know, but it's fall. So Saturn's not particularly happy being in the sign of Aries. It certainly isn't happy in the sign of Pisces. It doesn't do its thing because it's much, much happier in Capricorn. So she says here, it's up to you to develop your many resources to strengthen your character. This is a difficult placement because Saturn imposes delays on the drive and energy of Aries. You are egocentric and you find it difficult to recognise the rights of others. If you channel this energy properly, you'll combine initiative with discipline and be very persistent. Then you will use your inventiveness to great advantage by taking charge in a positive way. Your many subconscious fears give you a strong a desire for security. This position can indicate a father complex, or in a woman's chart, a jealous mate. Although your sense of timing is not the best, you have strong reasoning power and a love of debate. With difficult aspects, you may be superficial, defensive, impatient, and may constantly feel a need to justify yourself. You should learn tact and cooperation with others. Physical exercise is recommended. Now, that's on a natal Saturn in the sign of Aries, yeah? She's using examples, Rudolf Nureyev, direct dictator, beg your pardon, Joseph Stalin, physicist Albert Einstein, religious leader Mary Baker Eddy, Governor Edmund G. Jerry Brown. So those are people that have got that natally. But if you just take what she's saying, so Saturn in Aries, channel the energy properly. So discipline and be persistent because it delays the drive and energy of Aries. So it's as if you're driving the car with the brake on. So that's how it's going to feel while Saturn goes through Aries. Aries is a fire sign. It's happy. It wants to zoom ahead. It wants to be the leader. Saturn as a sign is very happy leading. However, the brakes are on, and no matter how much you accelerate, because you've forgotten to take the flipping handbrake off, it's going to feel pretty weird. Okay, so my final quote, because I was going to quote a little bit, because I do like his book. Oh, where's he gone? I might quote him a little bit. It's Anthony Lewin, his Ori astrology thing. But he's going to tell us about Saturn being in fall, but I'll hold on to that for a second. But this is Astrology for Dummies, and now we're on the chapter making astrology work for you, and its transits for page 214, coping with Saturn. So this is about transits at the times of our lives. I'm on page 214, coping with Saturn. People who know something about astrology tend to look forward to Jupiter transits, but they view Saturn's transits with alarm. Saturn takes about 30 years to whirl through the zodiac. It spends about 2.5 years in each sign, and it's associated with duty, discipline, effort, responsibility, obstructions, limitations, boundaries, and lessons learned. I had all of that last year and earlier on this year. Gloomy Saturn can bring despair, apathy, depression, not to mention a serious case of the blues. But just as Jupiter doesn't necessarily bring true love, best-selling first novels or winning lottery tickets, Saturn doesn't necessarily bring misery. It can bring responsibility in the form of a better job, limitation in the form of a committed relationship, and enhanced self-esteem that follows in the wake of self-discipline. To benefit from a Saturn transit, you need to create structure, get organised, and learn to manage your time effectively. Remember, transits by definition are transitory. They don't last long, so you must act promptly to take advantage of them. Now, I'm just going to read one, which is Saturn conjunct the Sun. So if you're an Aries and Saturn is conjuncting your Sun sign, because you'll have to get the flipping book and read for every other planet you got in your chart, you reap what you sow. That's the message of this important transit. Expect to work hard during this challenging, often laborious period. Saturn stimulates your ambitions, increases your need for security, and forces you to learn discipline. But it can also bring security, fulfillment, and recognition for work well done. Okay. Now we have to take into account, which Marion and Joan were also talking about in their chapter, that it isn't just the transit we need to take into account, is what internal aspects of our own is it going to trigger. Now my chart, my sun sign makes a million squares and sextiles and transgrams. I've got a splash chart. My sun is square my moon, so all of that was affecting my moon sign. It's conjunct my Mercury, so my sun is sextile my natal Saturn, so I knew how to cope with it, and my sun sign is trine my Neptune, so trust me, I did some prayer work, not praying because I'm ex-Catholic. So coping with Saturn, okay, so we need responsibility, could be a better job, and I do know people when Saturn has made a transit, and those are exactly the things that have happened. They've taken on more responsibility. So you need to consider in your chart, where is your sense of responsibility? Now, in my keywords document, which you can download from the website, www.maryenglish.com/keywords with capital K, KEYWORDS.txt, and that's all lowercase apart from the K for keywords. I've used Aries as appreciate, Saturn as responsibility, and then you've got all your houses that Saturn can be transiting through in the sign of Aries. So in my case, it's going to be transiting through the 8th house. So I'll be considering my investments that I haven't got, but I'll be considering investments, yeah. So let's go on to, I am going to quote from Anthony Louis and his Aries astrology, plain and simple, because he says Aries and the ruler is Mars. It's exalted when you've got your sun sign in Aries. Yay! Especially the 19th degree of Aries. If you've got 19 degrees Aries, write in and let me know, because our Anthony here reckons in Aries astrology. That's good. So if Aries is, if you've got your Venus in the sign of Aries, that's a detriment. And if you've got your Saturn in the sign of Aries, it's a fall. But Ray Orion was telling us about that. Anyway, that's Aries astrology. And just the final quote. So this is from my lovely The New Waits Compendium Natal Astrology. It ain't new because it was published this ridiculous year. Because my auntie gave it to me 1917, originally, my copy's 1967. He's talking about exaltations. Each planet has also a sign where it's traditionally exalted, where it's a good influence and is markedly emphasized. Traditionally, it is exalted in a particular degree of that sign, though the exaltation degrees are now usually ignored. And then he says the opposite of that is in its fall, where its influence is made weak or injurious. So Saturn ain't happy. He's going to go through the sign of Aries, so Saturn's going to have the brakes on, and Aries ain't going to be happy with it. So consider that if you are a sun sign Aries, what you do need to do is what degree is your sun sign, and then you're going to have to plan ahead using the transit rhythmogram or get the ephemeris up for the next couple of years. When is Saturn going to be exactly conjunct to your sun sign? Because at that point in time, you are going to have to be disciplined and serious. And I'm doing a really nice philosophy course at the moment, and the exercise this week is what would how do they word it? What would your wise self do, or what would a wise person do in the circumstances that you've just found yourself in? So if you were super wise, I don't know, you were Einstein, how would you cope with whatever's going on at the moment? I love that. I think that's great. Anyway, and that's the thing that you need to be questioning for yourself. Now, just to make things difficult, not only is Saturn going to spend a couple of years going through Aries, but Neptune's going to be there for yonks. Venus is there at the moment, yada, 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 but he's going to move. Chiron, is that right? Yeah, Chiron is there at the moment. That's precise. Yeah, today's the 18th. Now we've got Aries Rising's chart. So we're calling her, Julie, lovely, thank you, Julie. We're calling her Aries Rising. And she was born in the blah, 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 and then So she is a sun sign Pisces, and her ascendant is 7 degrees Aries. So she's going to have, hello, Julie, you are going to have Saturn go over your ascendant. Now, I can give you a recent example. My son has a Pisces ascendant, and Saturn has been transiting over his ascendant in Pisces. And the way it manifested for him is that, because the first house, an ascendant, the same thing, the building where he's living failed its safety certificate for fire. So therefore, the building that he's in has to be fixed. So Pisces is a water sign. Fire's the opposite of that. He's had a lot of, I don't know what the word is, but grief with the building being pulled apart and then rebuilt to comply with the fire safety regulations. Yeah, there's nothing he could do about it because it's the building that he's in, and all the other people are in the building as well. So that's how it's affected, inverted commas, him and his chart. It doesn't, so when it was in the sign of Pisces, doesn't aspect too much else in his chart. So in Aries Rising's case, the 7 degrees of Aries, when Saturn gets there, you have to ask yourself the question, where else have I got the 7 degrees? Whew, nothing. Okay, so you don't have anything else that's exactly 7 degrees that the Saturn going through there, because there's more than one thing to take into account when you're talking about a transit. So you have, I like to do the conjunctions because they're easier to work out in my head. However, if you've got aspects in your chart, so in Aries Rising case, she's got Sun conjunct Venus. So Venus is 3 degrees Pisces and the Sun is 11. And that forms a sextile to her natal Saturn, which is in Capricorn. So it's well happy there. So Saturn's absolutely happy in the sign of Capricorn. However, she, I don't know what's the best way to say she, I'm going to speak directly to you, Julie. You've got Saturn exactly conjunct your Neptune. Neptune's 11 degrees, Saturn is 11 degrees, and Uranus is 4 degrees. So you were born during the Indigo era. You have got a one-sided chart. You have got the conjunction of is it exactly? Yes, you've got the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune. Only happens once every 170 years. However, you're part of that conjunction that also includes Saturn. So you're an earlier indigo. So the earliest indigos were born in the 70s. Then the next lot were in the 80s. And the third final lot were in the 90s. So indigos I'm talking about now. With the Saturn in there, the slightly more responsible indigos. The first lot of indigos were the trailblazers, and they were sort of punk, because they're born during the punk era. Like, oh, I'm not going to do it. And then the Saturn ones that's in the conjunction are much, much, much more responsible. And then it was just the Uranus and Neptune thing, and they're a bit more, so they're born a little bit later in the 90s. They're more concerned with their life purpose. Okay. So don't trail off, Mary. Go back to Saturn. Whilst it's doing its transit, it's going to have in tow Neptune, because don't forget, Neptune's going to move slower than Saturn. Saturn is going to overtake Neptune, but Neptune is still going to be in the sign of Aries whilst the Saturn transit happens. With me? So first of all, Saturn will conjunct your ascendant at 7 degrees. So let's give you the date for that. So it's going to exactly conjunct your ascendant in April 2026. So you've got time to prepare. Is it going to do it once, or is it going to do it more times? No, we haven't got any have we? We just got the one, April 2026. It's only going to do it once. You're a lucky bunny. Yeah. So at that point in time, so April next year, when it conjuncts your ascendant, and the ascendant is how we show ourselves to the world. Aries is wanting to in the sign of Aries. Aries is wanting to get out there and do it. Saturn is going to transit, but with the brakes on. So while it conjuncts your ascendant, and that's the exact date when it's the 7 degrees, you need to make sure that you're projecting into the world something responsible, something down to earth, something where you're going to look as if you know what you're doing, type of thing. Then it's going to work its way through your first house. And in medical astrology, the ascendant and the first house represents your physical body and appearance. Along with the sun and the moon in your chart, is associated with personality characteristics. The sign on your ascendant, also known as the rising sign, because it's the sign rising on the eastern horizon at the moment of birth, can be a clue to potential health disorders. It can also help describe your vitality and physical prowess. It can also describe early environmental influences that may affect health. The sign and the ascendant can describe how energy is distributed throughout the body and how you resist disease. The ascendant is the cusp of the first house. Planets in the first house and planetary aspects of the ascendant qualify the flow of energy throughout the body. Fire and air signs rising are good conductors of energy, so you've got an Aries ascendant. Water and earth signs are more resistant to the flow of energy and need to be stimulated. How others perceive you and see you is also described by the ascendant. These characteristics generally do not refer to health, so they're not part of the following interpretations, which are descriptions of the strengths and weaknesses and potential health disorders associated with each rising sign. So when we've got a sign on the ascendant and Saturn goes past it, it's going to slow whatever is going on down. Now I've got I've got a Leo ascendant, God help us all, because that's a fire sign. So I do tend to leap where angels fear to tread. An Aries rising person is going to be a get out there and do it type, which is what you are. And Julie, in your case, however, your sun sign is located in equal house in the 12th. So that means that you don't want to take the front seat. I'm happy doing that, Leo ascendant. Just get me in front of the audience. Not with you. Yes, your knee-jerk reaction is get out there and do it, but the sun is located in the 12th. You want to be the backing vocalist. You don't want to be the lead singer. You want to be in the background. And Pisces in the 12th house, because it's the 12th house ruler, is the hermit and be the background and whatever. But because of that Aries ascendant, it is when under stress you are going to want to get it all sorted yesterday, which you can't do with Saturn. Now I'm quoting on the medical astrology with, love this book, Managing Your Health and Wellness by Diane Kramer. I enjoys this so much. She says, Aries ascendant, you have a strong body and good recuperative powers. You're naturally headstrong and competitive. You tend to be physically active with strong muscles and much endurance. Exercise is important to you as it stimulates your natural energy and helps you deal with stress. You can be tireless and tend to push your body too far, which can lead to physical exhaustion or muscle injury. You may experience adrenal exhaustion, which can be helped by vitamin C, parsley, pantothenic acid, vitamin A, zinc and licorice. You need to guard against accidents to your head and teeth and probably have a facial scar from falling as a child. The head, brain, stomach and kidneys can be vulnerable areas in your body. You're prone to feverish complaints and skin eruptions on your face caused by an improper diet, allergic reaction or emotional upset. You're not a man, so I won't appreciate it. You may have moles on your face. So that's what she says about Aries ascendant. And then Saturn going past. Now this is what she says about Saturn in the house. So it's not located there, but it's this is if you've natally got Saturn in the first house. Strength and endurance and a mature sense of responsibility. May have contracted early childhood illnesses. There may be some deprivation or neglect in your formative years, leading to skin disorders, thinning hair, dental problems. You may also get headaches and have insufficient adrenal activity. She talked about already, but so a somber attitude can lead to depression. So that's if you've natally got Saturn in the first house. Gosh, I know so many people have got that. But we're talking now that Saturn is going to transit through it. So your responsibility needs to be on your skin, your hair and your teeth. Okay, so and also you need to check out about sorting out if you get headaches during this transit. Yeah, I'm not saying you will, but that's what could be a possibility. So now keeping in mind that it's going to be doing that for an amount of time, what you need to take into account is the fact that it's transiting through there, and then what other planets in your chart will it trigger. And the only way to work that out, which we won't have time to do in this podcast, is to look at the transit rhythmogram, which I will email to you, and then just make a note on there. So we've got we've done a few things here now. So it goes into the sign of Aries and it's going to square to your moon because your moon is in the sign of Sagittarius. Why is it doing that? So it's squaring to... Okay, so it's a maths thing, not a sign thing. It's going to square your MC. So Saturn, when the minute it enters Aries for you, which will be... What date did I say it was? Oh, that's a point. I haven't said when Saturn's actually going to do it. So Saturn starts going through the sign of Aries on the 26th of May this year. It enters into Aries, it goes dum-da-dum-da-dum-da-dum until we get to the 13th of July, and then in its infinite wisdom decides to go retrograde just when it gets to 1 degree and 56 minutes. Then it goes chunk, 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 chunk all the way back and goes back into Pisces on the 2nd of September. And it's at 29 degrees, goes all the way back into Pisces to, I don't think I'm going to enjoy that. Ends the year at 26 degrees Pisces. So even though it's briefly going into Aries this year, it's next year, which is 2026, which is showing up on the transit rhythmogram for yourself, that it's going to have, well, and it's not going to get to your ascendant until then, is going to have more of an impact. So with your sun sign being 11 degrees, you lucky bunny, it's not going to affect you, but it's going to affect me. Eek. So summarising up yourself, it's inverted commas, not going to be doing anything until it gets to that 7 degrees, which I've already given you the date for. Neptune is going to follow along. So let me just have a look at next year's ephemeris. Neptune isn't going to get to your ascendant next year at all, because the furthest degree that it makes into the sign of Aries is 4 before it goes retrograde. Okay, so that's probably not going to be until, let's see what the transit rhythmogram tells us. When's Neptune going to do it? Neptune doesn't conjunct your ascendant. I shouldn't say because you can't see what I'm saying, until May 2028. It does it 3 times. So Neptune on the ascendant is May 28, and then September 28, and then March 29. And well, Saturn finished its thing. Saturn will have finished its thing. It'll be into the sign of Taurus in 28. Yeah. So you'll experience Saturn first, and then you're going to get Neptune. Now, Neptune you've got a better relationship with because it's the ruling planet to your sun sign. However, when Neptune conjuncts to the ascendant, because it happened to my sun, make sure that you're checking water. Okay, so the plumbing, I think his boiler went boomf. But we need to keep in mind that Neptune in Aries is a completely different kettle of fish, which we're not talking about today. We're talking about the transit of Saturn through the sign of Aries. So in your case, it's going to be exactly conjunct your ascendant at that point in time. Is just don't try and cut any corners. Do everything by the book. Read the advice. Do the thing. And that is what I'd learned to do in my case, because it was going through my 7th house. So we've got all of those houses to take into account for everybody that's listening. So when Saturn goes through your 1st house, it's yourself. It goes through your 2nd, it's finances. Your 3rd, it's communication. Your 4th, it's the home and roots and the physical building you live in. The 5th is creativity, romance and children. 6th is your health, routine and work. 7th, close personal relationships, which happened to me. 8th, sex, birth, death, investments. 9th, philosophy, further education, travel. 10th, career. Now when Saturn goes through, whoever's listening, your 10th house, then you need to be sensible at work and maybe you'll be promoted. 11th house, it's your friendships and groups, and 12th house is the hidden self, so that's when you need to do your yoga. So I hope that's helped a bit. Obviously I haven't covered everything, and like anything in astrology, which is why I haven't talked about what a lot of people are talking about, I wanted to make it personal today, and that's why I've done one person's chart. I work, because I've got Sun in the 7th, with people on a personal level. I'm not your mundane astrologer. I don't cover that. If you are a client of mine, Saturn's transiting through your sign and you're an Aries, we'll talk about how can you bolster and build up and strengthen whatever house it's going through, and you yourself. What advice do you need? Where do you need to be the responsible person and do the responsible thing? My practice is based on working one-on-one with people. So I hope whoever you are that's listening, that's helped. And in Julie's case, thank you very much for your Aries Rising chart. Now, just a little reminder that I'm not using Skype anymore. I'm using Zoom. It seems to be okay at the moment. I might experiment at some point with Google something or other, but I'm not doing that yet. So I hope you have a fab week. And finally, if you've listened to this episode right to the end, you will get a 10% discount. And the discount code is Saturn, Saturn, and then the number 10. And it will give you 10% off a gold level in-depth consultation or a silver level consultation or a pre-record. So those are the 3 readings that I'm offering. If you want to have one and you want to have 10% off, the discount expires on the 30th of June this year, so you've got a bit of time to get in there before the code expires. You can book your reading up to 3 months in advance. You don't have to use it right away, but the code itself, so I don't know when you're listening, but if you're listening and we haven't got to the 30th of June yet, you'll still be able to use the code, and the code is Saturn, Saturn, and 10, the number 10, with a 1 and a 0, so not writing the word 10, so it's 10 numerical, Saturn 10 numerical. You'll get a 10% discount. Thank you very much for listening to the end, and we're all going to be terribly responsible now, knowing that in the future Saturn's going to be transiting through wherever it is in your chart. So I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye bye now.